Hey guys, I'm Mike from the Crafty Gentleman blog, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a resin colour block coaster just like this one. Now a quick heads up, this video is sponsored by Just For You Online UK, and they provided all of the resin making supplies that I needed for this project. So if you do want to make your own, I'll leave all of the details and the links in the description to this video and also the accompanying blog post. Now before I show you the tutorial, I just wanted to give you a quick heads up that this is the first time that I've ever used resin before. I wanted to try it for a little while, but this is the first time that I've really got my hands on it and actually tried making things with it. So this is a really easy project for beginners just like me to try. I did take a week or so just playing with the resin and getting a feel for it, just so that I could iron out all of the problems and potential difficulties, just to make it as easy as possible for you guys to replicate this at home. So without further ado, here is the tutorial. Okay, so the very first step in making our colour block geometric coaster is to cut the colour design in the centre out of a medium to heavyweight cardstock. Now this is going to be a lot easier than trying to replicate the design using completely resin only. So instead we're going to create the design, the coloured design, in paper, and then we're going to basically encapsulate it within the resin itself. And this is going to give us an absolute guarantee of that beautifully sharp angular design. So I'm using here just a paper trimmer, but you could also use scissors as well, or a craft knife and a craft mat. So I'm cutting a few different shades of blue and grey down to 13cm strips, so that fits the silicone mould perfectly, which is 13 by 13cm square. Now that I've got these cut, as well as that little grey bit that overlaps it, I'm now just starting to stick them all together using double-sided tape. And this is just going to make sure that there's no movement or shifts when we pour the resin on top. Obviously we don't want them to float away or become slightly detached, because the power in this design is having them perfectly lined up. You could also use a glue stick or anything like that. The idea is just to hold them together loosely. So with the design now made, I have got some rubber gloves on here. You can also use disposable plastic gloves, but I like to use these reusable ones. It's a little bit less wasteful. And I'm also using an old yogurt pot here just to mix my resin and hardener. So first up, I'm going to pour in the resin itself. So I'm going to pour approximately 90 grams of this. So I've got some weighing scales there, being very, very careful not to spill any, because this is not the sort of thing you want to be spilling on your table. So I've put some paper down there as well just to protect my workspace. So I'm pouring around 90 grams of the resin into this old yogurt pot, just making sure that's weighed quite accurately. And then once I've done that, I'm going to pour 50% of the weight in hardener. So the idea is that we get a 2-to-1 ratio of resin to hardener. So I used approximately 90 grams of resin, so I'm pouring in around 45 grams of hardener. And it's best here to pour a little bit more than you expect in terms of total volume. So if you're not too sure exactly how much to make, it's best to err on the side of caution and make a little bit too much here, because you do not want to get to the point where this is mixed and ready to pour and you realise you've not got quite enough, because that's going to start setting from the moment I've joined the resin and the hardener together. Now before I go any further, I'm just going to move my weighing scales out of the way. So I'm done with those. I've weighed out my key ingredients, the resin and the hardener, but I want my base piece of my coaster to be a really nice white, so the coloured design really pops against it. So I'm using here some of the paste, the coloured paste by Just For You Online UK. Now you want to use no more than 10% by volume of this paste, which is a little bit tricky to estimate. So I've just done roughly 2 blobs using these lollipop sticks. A little goes a very long way with these, so don't overload it with colour, because that can affect the final setting of this epoxy. So I'm giving it a really good stir here. Now you want to stir this for around 4 minutes ideally. So I've obviously sped this up, but try and stir it quite slowly. You don't want to introduce too much air and too much bubbles, but make sure that you get a lovely consistent paste. and then you can pour it directly into your silicone mold. So I'm pouring it from the center just so we get a nice even spread, and that will slowly fill all the way to the edges. Now you don't want to fill this to the top because this is just the first of 2 layers of resin that we're making for this coaster design. So I'll just scrape off any drips there, and as I'm pouring this, this is starting to harden now. So there is a reasonable working time with this, but you don't want to hang about here. So you can see I'm starting just to spread that to all of the corners, make sure that we've got good coverage, and it will level itself as well, but I'm just going to give it a little shake just to make sure that it's nice and settled. And then once it is, I actually found that a really nice way to get rid of any small air bubbles within this is to use a lighter here. So this is a candle lighter with quite a long stem, and I've just lit it up and I'm just passing it over the surface of the resin, and that's just basically going to draw out any little air bubbles that might slightly ruin the surface effect of this finished layer. This isn't essential, this part, it's just if you notice a few bubbles it can be really good. So I've let this set for a good 24 to 48 hours and it's nice and firm now. So that's the white layer. Do not take it out of the mold. Instead, we're going to put the paper design that we made earlier directly onto this white resin base. So again, I'm just using a few little bits of sticky tape, but again, you could use a glue stick instead, whatever you have to hand, and then place that directly onto the white resin square. Now, the purpose behind having it stuck down again is just when we pour over the clear resin, we don't want it to move around, we don't want it to be lifted up or move around or rotate in any way. So I've already mixed my resin and hardener again to the same ratio as earlier. I'm just using an old bottle here, so it was some squash I just cut the bottom out of. I've stirred it up already off camera, and now I'm just pouring the clear resin directly on top. So importantly, I didn't add any of the coloured paste this time, none of the pigment, because I want this to be completely clear so that we can see that card design coming through. And I'm now using a skewer just to make sure that I get coverage all the way to the edge. So this time I poured roughly half the volume of my clear resin compared to the white resin, because I want it to be quite a thin clear layer on top. I don't want it to be a really thick block of clear. So now it's all spread out, I'm just using the pointy end of the skewer just to pop any larger air bubbles. It's especially important that we don't have air bubbles in the clear layer because, one, they'll be a lot more noticeable in a clear resin, but also this is the top layer, so it's going to be the visual layer of the coaster, so we want it to be as clear and perfectly formed as possible. And then the very last step is just to pass that flame over it again, making sure that you don't get too close, you don't want to touch the surface, you just want to pass the flame over so that the heat draws out those bubbles. And then after 24 to 48 hours again, it should be completely set and you should have a really nice smooth finish on top. So you can now demold this, take away the silicone mold, and then leave it for probably another 24 hours just to make sure it's completely set. And then your coaster will be ready to use. So there you have it, a nice and simple colour block resin coaster made in just a couple of days, including all of the drying time. Now, if you do like this video, if you have enjoyed it or found it useful, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you'd like to, you can subscribe for more crafty tutorials and videos. And there is also an accompanying blog post to this video with loads of photos and all of the written instructions. So the link to that is in the description for this video as well. And also over on my blog, there are literally hundreds more different craft projects that you might like to try as well. So thanks very much, guys. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I will hopefully see you soon for another crafty video.